Everyone, thank you so much for joining us. We've been creating a lot of content about food recently because our many Detect and Detox test users tested high for hormone-disrupting chemicals due to toxins in their foods. We help people detox from BPA in their can linings, paraben used as preservatives in food, phthalates from their takeout containers, and much more. However, there are other toxic chemicals in a lot of conventional food that are beyond plastic chemicals. What I'm talking about here is herbicides like glyphosates. Increasing research have suggested that glyphosates can pose some health risk, and it's best if we avoid this food altogether. Glyphosate is a toxic chemical used in RoundUp, and it's actually one of the most common weed killers in the world. With that said, it's obviously easier said than done, and so we must be advocates for ourselves, and that's why we're really excited to join today by Kelly Ryerson, known to social media as Glyphosate Girl. Kelly is an environmental health writer, filmmaker, and ardent public health advocate. So we can't wait to hear about her efforts to educate the millions and change the laws around the use of glyphosate. So.
Thank you so much for joining us. I'm being so excited. I can't wait to chat about glyphosate.
Oh my gosh, completely. So, it's a topic that I always want to talk about. So,
yes, we know. I did a little introduction already, but for all the viewers, so tell us a little bit about your background and what led you to become a public health advocate.
So, I just, for one, always been interested in public health, and I took some courses actually in college, and there was just particularly in the area of inequities of poor quality food and or like in the idea of pharmaceutical clinical trials, like who should be tested, who shouldn't be. And it got me really thinking more globally in terms of public health impacts and inequities. And so that sort of like piqued my interest. And then after having my second child, I fell into a real state of chronic illness. And it was the kind of thing that many of, frankly, my friends and friends of friends are dealing with now. And it was very vague, kind of like or kind of like chronic fatigue, like weird rashes. My eyesight wasn't fantastic. And just, it felt like a lot of things were falling apart in my body. And so, like everyone else, and I went to many doctors to try and get an answer. And the answer was always medications. And so I found myself, on several antidepressants, anti-anxiety. I sort of had inflammation, so I was given steroids. And, it became this long list of pharmaceuticals I was being treated with, and I wasn't getting better. And those are tricky medications. And I know so many women, and probably particularly post-pandemic, are automatically told that they're a head case, if they have these issues, or a hypochondriac. And I was like, I'm not imagining this. So finally, I went to see a psychiatrist who ran some initial blood work. He's not like a naturopathic at all, but I was like, well, maybe I am crazy. And it turned out that I had severe vitamin deficiencies. So it was the first time I'd ever tested for vitamin C or, these other critical things, even magnesium and all my B vitamins and D. And I had scurvy, like for real. And scurvy, for those who don't know, is something that should never happen anymore because we have plenty of access to vitamin C, but it's a severe vitamin C deficiency. And so I was like, oh my gosh, how is this happening? And around the same time, my sister was diagnosed with celiac disease. And I was like, oh, maybe that's why. And I was not celiac. I was like, oh man, okay, that would have been an easy answer. And at the time, I finally saw a doctor. This is like the 20th doctor at this point, who was like, you should try giving up gluten. And so I was like, all right, well, we'll see. And at that point, I just got a notice. Okay. At that point, I thought that being gluten-free was merely like a trend, not a medical thing. And most doctors are like, that's not a thing. And I started digging. And eventually I realized that our wheat is very different from the wheat that people used to have. And I started thinking more and more about like all these food sensitivities that people are having. Um, and where did they come from? It just doesn't make sense. And you know, we have a whole generation of people now where this is normal. So you would likely have a disease. I mean, we have 1 in 2 children now with a chronic disease. That's so odd and just so wrong. And so I, around that time, realized that wheat is being sprayed with Roundup, and Roundup is it's a weed killer, and glyphosate is the active ingredient in it, and it's also used for pre-harvest drying of wheat and grains and legumes, and a few other things as well. And so what happens is the farmers will spray it. It makes it really, the crop will dry super evenly, and then they can harvest it easily, relatively cheaply. And then, you know, it ends up in all of our bread and our cereal, and we're very much exposed to it. So it's an interesting sort of combination of gluten and Roundup that sort of drew my attention. That's a very long answer to your question.
That is so crazy. I knew it's being used in growing, but I had no idea like post-harvest they also spray Roundup. So then then glyphosate must be like super common in the agriculture industry then.
Yeah. So, I mean, phenomenally so. So around in the Roundup was introduced to the market in the 70s. And it was during this time in agriculture where people were thinking post-war, particularly post-World War II, where we had a bunch of chemicals that were developed during the war, and they were repurposed for agriculture, because why not take those chemicals and eat them? And so they were repurposed. And glyphosate was sort of in that same genre, and it was actually a metal chelator, and it was used to clean pipes and boilers, and because it would pull minerals and out of these like metal pipes. And so then they realized, oh, you know what else it does is it kills weeds. So it was put on the market in the 70s, and then Monsanto realized that their patent was going to be expiring on it in the year 2000. And so they had a deadline to make sure that they could still sell Roundup even when it went off patent. And they also saw a whole huge new market of GMOs. And so GMO seeds, which made people, I actually didn't know anything about this until I started digging, like, that's what a GMO is. So it's a great way for a company to own something live like a seed and really own our food. And so they made these seeds that would be resistant to Roundup. So they're called Roundup Ready corn, Roundup Ready soy. So they could spray it as much as they want on top of all these crops, and nothing, they wouldn't die because they were resistant to it. So that led to an explosion of use in Roundup just across the board, just all over our lands, and actually mostly globally. Europe has been more careful on that front because they tend to take more of a precautionary principle approach to regulation. But glyphosate specifically, that's when it suddenly became omnipresent between the pre-harvest spraying of anything, anything basically grain, bread, and then also for use on our GMOs, which compose the large, vast majority, I think it's something like 90% of the soybeans and corn that are grown in this country. So yeah, it's just literally everywhere.
That is really dark. So what about organic food? Like, does glyphosate actually get into organic foods as well?
So it can, and that's really shocking because so organic food should by and large be free of any of these synthetic pesticides. The organic industry does use pesticides, but they are not as toxic, and they're nature-based. So something like Roundup shouldn't be anywhere near organic food of any kind. Meanwhile, it is so now omnipresent in our water, in the air, in everywhere in our soils, that it's really nearly impossible for organic food to be fully glyphosate free. I mean, it's obviously a lot lower of a level, but you know, it's just shocking because when it rains, it will rain glyphosate, and this is globally. They found it globally. because it's just everywhere. And to add to the trickiness is that a large chunk, I can't remember what the percentage is off the top of my head, but it's a significant portion of the GMO corn, the Roundup Ready GMO corn that's made, is converted into biofuel. So when you see on your gas pump, this is a biofuel that is from the GMO corn. So you think about that going in and burning right in your gas tank. And then we have even more emission of, glyphosate. So it is really impossible to avoid.
Oh, wow. You mentioned about a bunch of health concerns, and then we know there are some rising health concerns humans have faced since like the 1970s that actually coincides with the use of glyphosate. So what are those health concerns?
So yeah, it's just so appalling that now you're seeing the activist in me, because I am so frustrated by this. It is so clearly causing so much devastation in all of us, and you can track it. I mean, and this has been a process. Some scientists like Dr. Seneff and Anthony Samsel came out with a critical study, I think, and it traced the use of glyphosate alongside certain conditions that are now endemic in our society, and they are highly correlative. And so, of course, scientists will say, correlation doesn't mean causation, but Stephanie Seneff is always someone that's saying, well, okay, if it's not glyphosate, then what is it? What is it that's we're all exposed to all the time? This is the most used pesticide in history. And so what else could it be that's causing this epidemic? And so a chronic disease. And so then scientists have done many studies across the board of what potential problems there are with consuming glyphosate. And the things that they are so terrible, because there's been a lot of fame around, not fame, but interest in the RoundUp trials, and that is based on non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And the reason why that particular trial and that subject could go to trial is because there's been enough scientific research that it could be shown in court, and very substantial, large library of evidence of independent research, not industry bought. So that's the cancer component, but it doesn't stop with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. There are other cancers that it is correlated to, but I think like what I am most concerned about at this point is that it's a really significant endocrine disruptor. It really disrupts the endocrine system, and you're seeing all kinds of horrible effects in reproduction. It's been connected with preterm birth. Dr. Shauna Swan recently did a study on that. It goes into actually the eggs and the sperm. And so now we very much know that a man who is consuming Roundup laden products, which is most things, the Roundup can cross the blood testes barrier and go into the semen. So we have that issue. There are other studies that have come out that it makes epigenetic changes. And so in the children, but they're not showing up my children, I consumed food with Roundup. My children are consuming food with Roundup, but even if they didn't, their children are going to show up having some neurodevelopmental disorders, according to the study, and become slowly infertile. And what that is effectively what you're seeing happening, and also the androgenization of children, like exposure to glyphosate is changing the genitalia of babies, and that actually is textbook for end of species. Like what's happening is that we can't reproduce because it's not a suitable environment to reproduce in. And what's sad is there are a lot of things you can't control with that, but this is completely under the control 100% of our regulatory system. Like that is why they're there. This is not oh darn, we just have to grin and bear it, and like it's just a fact of life. It absolutely is not. This is a total manipulation and persuasion by industry, and all about money. Like end of species, like money. It blows my mind. And if more people knew about this, that this was happening, I just think that it seems almost unbelievable, because why would our country poison us in mass?
Yeah, this is really crazy. So is there toxicologists, many of them always say, dose makes the poison. So how much glyphosate is actually deemed safe? or is there any safe levels?
So in my opinion, actually, most scientists will say that there is no safe level of glyphosate because even in the smallest consumption that you have, it's known to go into the microbiome and cause great dysbiosis and disruption. And now we are knowing just how absolutely critical the microbiome is to our own functioning and so many different bodily processes. And so there really is no safe level. But if you look and you see the history of what's been allowed to be sprayed, for example, for pre-harvest, you'll see this increasing dose that's allowed to be sprayed over time. And that's due to no science. No science has showed, oh, we have this new evidence that actually it's not that toxic. And so we'll just like keep on pushing it up. That is straight up farmers pressuring and industry pressuring the government to increase the levels so that they can have more ease of spraying. That is all that is. And so we're far more exposed today than we were 10 years ago because of that level being just increased. And who's paying attention to it? Like no one. And so they've been able to get away. Well, I shouldn't say no one because there are some people that have been focused on that for a long time, but there aren't enough people that are focused on it.
That is really crazy. So then there's like, first one was like legislators they're not really taking into consideration people's exposure levels. And then the second is obviously there is a connection between the big business and these loose regulations that it's not being implemented or like human health is not really the priority.
Exactly. Yeah, human health is really down the line. And when you start digging into what's famously called now the Monsanto papers that were released during the RoundUp trials, you can see exactly how Monsanto and now Bayer gets away with it. And there's they have a whole history of ghostwriting papers to protect their papers, to protect their science, and then submitting them. And then the EPA bases their decisions off of the companies sponsored like research. And you as a scientist, like there are a lot of different ways you can manipulate the outcomes of a study to look favorable. Just you decide what data you're showing, what you are cherry picking, and that is what the EPA is no fool. Like they know this is happening and they are very much in communication with them. So unfortunately, it's not even like, oh, they're just tricked. Like they're very wise. And I know through some whistleblower reports that there are people within the EPA that, I mean, they're so upset about it. But they lose their job if they say that's not the right thing to do. Like if they say, no, this absolutely causes endocrine disruption, it's a carcinogen, it's, the long list, then they lose their job. And that is a huge problem.
That is so wrong. And
it's so wrong.
So then as, consumers, what can we do like to make our voice heard?
So to make our voice heard, you can make a lot of difference just with your purchasing power. And I just recently went for a small shopping over at Whole Foods, and it was just so darn expensive that I know that's not a reality, even like, for most people at all. And not only that, but who has organic food near them? That's an enormous problem that actually the USDA is trying to address and also expanding organic options. But my biggest suggestion is go to your farmer's market and support your local farmers that are doing organic farming, because it is not a highly profitable business by any stretch. And they are the ones that are converting the soil back to be healthy soil. And you're going to also just, feel so much better. And, one thing that is so important about buying those types of crops and, feeling the healing from it is that organic soil, so Roundup and glyphosate will pull, if it's sprayed on a field, it pulls the minerals out of the soil just like it did the boilers and the pipes. And so it's called chelating. And so, I think that I don't think I'm wrong, that a huge problem in this country and globally is, how everyone is so stressed out and so anxious. Well, they're not getting key nutrients. They're not getting magnesium. They're not getting zinc, because these things are not in that soil. And so you need to have these minerals and nutrients in the soil in order to get into the food. So then when you eat it, your body is getting that, and then we wouldn't have to supplement. So that when you go to your farmer's market, you'll see that those foods are very much more nutritious.
So other than like shop at local farmers market, are there any other tips that we can do to limit our exposure to glyphosate?
So I think one thing that people do is put in whole house water filtration. That's a good way to not be exposed. Another common exposure point for women is tampons because it's in the cotton. So particularly women that, I mean, all women, but I think particularly women that are trying to get pregnant, they definitely shouldn't be having RoundUp up their vagina. So that's a good place to really maybe spend a little bit more and get those organic things. In terms of activism, there's going to be a lot coming up actually this summer. So opportunities for voices to be heard through petitioning and I don't know if you want to ask me about I could ask myself about the White House conference.
Yes, that's actually my next question. Tell us about that.
Okay, good.
White House conference. That's I want to save the best for the last. That's why I'm like saving that question.
Oh, okay, awesome. So hopefully there's enough context for this so that you guys will understand. But so there's a White House conference on nutrition that is coming up in September, and not that many people know about it because it was put together relatively rapidly. And the last one was in 1969. And out of that White House conference by President Nixon came food stamps and a bunch of other programs that really made food more accessible. And it was sort of before even toxins were much, at least not RoundUp. And I don't think atrazine was out yet either. But before pesticides were really a huge thing. And so what's amazing about it is that at that White House conference, it was so bipartisan, and there were so many agreements that were made before this White House conference, which is actually sort of just ceremonial, that things that were put into executive order, it was something like, 1,650 of the 1,800 proposed executive orders were just like passed.
Oh, wow.
And so it seems extremely efficient to get things done versus really long bureaucratic, processes. So there's a group at Tufts that they're a really excellent nutrition department, and they have been working for a few years to organize a new White House conference because it seemed high time, and people are very aware of chronic disease and as well as there's just so many food deserts across this country, or even if someone wanted to eat well, they couldn't. And so addressing all of those things and rethinking, okay, so what should be in a school lunch? So there are just a lot of facets to this conference. So one thing that has been really stunning to me is that nowhere have I seen any discussion of toxins in our food. So there's a lot of discussion about what's good nutrition. And I would argue that you can't say that something is super nutritious if it has all these vitamins, but it also has, the things that you test for, right?
Right.
And including glyphosate, but that's just the beginning. I mean, there's so many other things that are in there. And so my goal is to get those elements on the table so that they're also considered, and maybe we can have more regular testing and potentially bypass those hiccups that we have at the EPA, FDA, and USDA, where they're so bought off that it's going to be really hard to make change. So I'm going to be working with a few others and starting a campaign this summer to get that to get our voices heard. So look out for that. And in the meantime, also, and maybe you can post on your site too, there are some listening sessions that are being hosted by the team that's running the White House conference in lead up to the conference, just to hear what the public has to say. So those of us who are concerned about getting the message about let's have toxins as part of the conversation around nutrition, this would be an excellent opportunity to get in there. Jenna, I hope you registered to get in there and make sure it's there.
Wow, this is really exciting. I had no idea that this conference can be really, really effective getting these policies passed. So we'll definitely get involved.
Good. Yeah, I hope so. Because, I don't know whether in some people's minds, and certainly in many of the politicians, I think they don't want it discussed because it's a challenging topic, because it brings in, fracking also pollutes our food and our water. So it brings in a lot of heavy political issues that likely, a lot of, at least the regulators, but probably the Congress people too, are tied up in. So potential expediting this issue.
But either way, that people's voice need to be heard, and need to be discussed regardless whether it's hard or not, because it's a matter of human health.
It really is. I mean, not even just human health, but like, are we going to survive past a few more generations? Like, that's sort of where we are. And it's just very interesting to me. It's not being discussed. But I will give a shout out to Senator Cory Booker, because he does talk about it. And he actually runs the Food and Organics committee in Senate. So that he hopefully will have a voice there too.
Wonderful. So we're going to include all this information in the LinkedIn bio promoting this this Instagram live, and I will also make sure it's on our website as well, so people can learn more about the conference and then get involved and listen to the sessions. So
awesome.
Thank you so much for providing all this great info. So everyone be sure to follow Kelly at Glyphosate Girl. And also you can learn more about glyphosate, Kelly's activism, and also this September White House conference by clicking our LinkedIn bio promoting this IG Live. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Awesome. Thank you. So good to see you.
Talk to you soon.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.